The air in the burial mound, sealed for over 1,000 years, is cold and still. It is the summer of 1904 on a farm near Tonsberg in Vestfold, Norway. The farmer's spade has struck something hard, something curved and wooden. Archaeologists are called. What they unearth will become a legend, the Oseberg ship. It is a vessel of breathtaking artistry, a longship not for war, but for a final journey into the dark. Inside, a treasure trove, ornate carvings of gripping beasts, a decorated cart, beds, tapestries, and the bones of 15 horses. And at the heart of it all, in a burial chamber built into the ship's stern, lie the remains of 2 women. One is old, perhaps 70, her bones riddled with cancer. The other is younger, around 50. They are clearly of immense status. But who were they? For a century, the world believed it knew. The older woman was Queen Asa, a legendary figure from the sagas, grandmother of the first king of Norway. The younger was her servant, sacrificed to accompany her into the next world. It was a clean story, a powerful story. But the bones keep their secrets. Modern forensic analysis, detailed in studies like the 2008 University of Oslo osteological report, has thrown this narrative into chaos. Their DNA is too degraded to link them definitively to royal lineages. We are left with a macabre tableau: 2 powerful women, a ship filled with riches, and a silent, 1,000-year-old mystery. This ship is our starting point. It is a monument to the power a woman could wield in the Viking Age, but it is also a warning. For every queen granted a magnificent burial, countless others met a different fate when their kingdoms fell. Their stories are not found in treasure-filled graves, but in the cold earth of mass burials, in the silence of the chronicles, and in the chilling logic of political conquest. To understand the fate of a defeated queen, we must first understand her value. In the fragmented world of 9th and 10th century Scandinavia, a high-status woman was not merely a wife or mother. She was a political instrument. She was a peace weaver, a term from Old English poetry that perfectly captures her role. Her marriage was the thread that stitched fragile alliances together. Her womb was the vessel that carried the future of a dynasty. Her lineage was a form of currency, traded for land, power, and temporary peace between warring chieftains. The Icelandic law codes, like the Graggas, while compiled later, reflect this reality. They meticulously detail the fines for insulting a woman, not out of a sense of chivalry, but because an insult to a chieftain's wife was an attack on his honor and the stability of his network. Her value was directly tied to her husband's power and her father's name. But what happens when that power is shattered? When the shield wall breaks, the king is slain, and the longhouse is burning. The peace weaver's thread is snapped. She instantly transforms from an asset into a profound liability. She is the living embodiment of the old regime. If she is pregnant, she carries the seed of revenge, a potential heir who could one day return to reclaim his birthright. For a conquering Viking king, the wife of his fallen enemy was a strategic problem to be solved. And the solutions were rarely merciful. They were a cold calculus of power, designed to neutralize a threat, absorb a lineage, or erase it from memory completely. The methods ranged from enslavement to forced marriage to a quiet, unrecorded death. These women were the ultimate prize and the most dangerous loose end of any conquest. Sometimes the captured queen did not become a victim. She became a weapon. We travel back to the early 9th century to the petty kingdoms of Norway. King Guthrodr, the hunter of Vestfold, was a man of ambition. He desired Princess Asa, the daughter of King Harald Redbeard of Agder, and with her, her father's kingdom. Harald refused the marriage proposal. So Guthrodr did what Viking kings did. He took what he wanted by force. The Heimskringla, the great chronicle of the Norwegian kings written by Snorri Sturluson, tells the story. Guthrodr's ships descended on Agder at night. He killed King Harald and his son in a brutal battle, looted the royal estate, and captured Princess Asa. He forced her into marriage, a wedding ceremony held in the shadow of her father's burning hall. She was now his queen, but a queen in chains. Soon, she was pregnant with Guthrodr's son, the heir to the very dynasty that had destroyed her own. For most women, this would have been the end. Their lineage, their power, their future, all absorbed by their conqueror. But Asa was not most women. She waited. She played the part of the dutiful, conquered wife. She gave birth to her son, who she named Halfdan, and she planned her revenge. Her position was one of extreme peril. Any hint of defiance would have meant her death and the death of her infant son. She was surrounded by the men who had slaughtered her kin. She had to bide her time until the moment was right, until her conqueror's guard was down. Her patience was a form of cold, calculated fury, a slow-burning fire waiting for the perfect moment to erupt and consume the man who had stolen her life. 1 year after the forced marriage, King Guthrother held a great feast. He drank heavily. The saga describes him as being very drunk as he stumbled from the hall down to his ship moored at the shore. As he crossed the gangplank in the darkness, a figure lunged from the shadows and ran him through with a spear. The assassin was killed instantly by the king's guards, but the act was done. The Heimskringla is explicit. Queen Asa immediately admitted the killer was her man. It was her vengeance, paid in full. With her husband dead, she took her infant son Halfdan and fled back to her home kingdom of Agder. There she did not hide. She seized power, ruling as queen regent for her son until he came of age. This captured, pregnant queen did not just survive. She avenged her family, reclaimed her kingdom, and secured its future for her child. Her son, Halfdan the Black, would become a powerful king. And his son, Asa's grandson, would be Harald Fairhair, the first man to unite all of Norway. A unified nation, born from a queen's righteous vengeance. And this brings us back to the cold earth of the Oseberg Mound. Dated to the year 834 AD, the burial fits the timeline of Asa's death perfectly. For decades, it was believed to be her final resting place, a magnificent tribute in the heart of the kingdom her husband once ruled and she later controlled. If you value history that unearths the forgotten stories of power and revenge, subscribe to the Sealed Room. Because the science that complicates this saga is even more revealing. The romantic narrative of the Oseberg Mound being Queen Asa's grave is powerful, but modern archaeology resists easy answers. Recent analysis of the skeletal remains, including mitochondrial DNA studies conducted by the University of Oslo, has failed to link the women to any known royal lines. Furthermore, their diet, reconstructed through isotope analysis, doesn't entirely match what would be expected of the highest echelons of Vestfold royalty. This scientific ambiguity does not disprove the Asa theory, but it opens the door to other, darker possibilities. Perhaps these were not queens at all, but a Verlva, a powerful seeress, and her ritual assistant, figures of immense spiritual but not political power. Or perhaps they represent something else entirely, a political statement. Could a rival dynasty have buried two of its own high-status women in the heart of their enemy's territory as a profound declaration of dominance? The truth is, we may never know. The Oseberg women remain suspended between saga and science, a testament to female power but also a chilling reminder of how easily individual identities are lost to time. Their story highlights a critical divide in the fates of captured royal women. A figure like Asa, who could seize power and embed herself in the political narrative of a nation's founding, might be remembered, even if her final resting place is debated. But what of those who could not? What of the women who lacked Asa's ruthless determination or her window of opportunity? Theirs was a different path, a descent into a social death from which there was often no return. For every Queen Asa who seized a throne, 1,000 other royal women were reduced to property. Their stories are not of vengeance, but of erasure. We find the clearest template in the Icelandic Laxdæla saga, in the story of an Irish princess named Melkorka. Around the year 930 AD, Viking longships appeared on the coast of her father's kingdom. The world burned. The saga states she was captured at the age of 15 after her father, King Muirchertach mac Nael, was killed in battle. In a single afternoon of fire and steel, she went from princess to thrall, a slave. Her identity, her lineage, her very name was stolen. She was likely taken to the bustling, brutal Viking port of Dublin, a city the Norse founded and which served as the largest slave market in Western Europe. Archaeological digs at sites like Fishamble Street have unearthed the footprint of this 10th-century slave-trading hub. Here, Irish captives like Melkorka were sold as chattel alongside people from across the known world. She was no longer a person, she was currency. The saga reports she was purchased by an Icelandic chieftain named Höskuldur Dalakarlsson for 3 marks of silver, 3 times the standard price for a female slave. He was buying a luxury good, a beautiful object. He did not know or did not care that she was royalty. To protect the last thing she had, the truth of her identity, Melkorka made a desperate choice. She refused to speak. For years, she pretended to be mute, her silence a final, defiant act of rebellion in a world that controlled everything else about her. Höskuldur took his silent, beautiful slave back to his farm in Iceland and made her his concubine. She soon became pregnant. This is the fate of the defeated royal woman in its rawest form. Her child would not be the heir to an Irish throne but the bastard son of a slave, his legal status hanging by the thinnest of threads. He would be born into his mother's condition. One day, Höskuldur overheard Melkorka speaking to their young son, Olaf, by a stream. She was speaking Irish Gaelic, revealing her long-held secret. The discovery changed little for her, but it planted a seed in her son. Olaf, later known as Olaf the Peacock for his magnificent dress, grew up to be a great chieftain, but he was forever shadowed by his mother's past. When he was a man, he refused to accept this stain on his lineage. He sailed to Ireland and presented himself at the court of his grandfather. He was recognized, honored, and offered the chance to become heir to the Irish throne. He refused, choosing instead to return to Iceland, but now he returned with something more valuable than gold, a recognized royal bloodline. He had reclaimed the status that was stolen from his mother, but Melkorka herself never did. She remained in Iceland, her life defined by her capture. Her story, preserved in the saga, is a chilling archetype. It demonstrates that, for a captured queen or princess, the physical violence of a raid was often just the beginning. The deeper horror was the systematic destruction of her identity, the reduction of her bloodline to a commodity, and the consignment of her children to a world where they had to fight to reclaim a legacy their captors had tried to bury forever. Not every woman was a queen with a chronicle, or a princess whose story was woven into a saga. Most were nameless. Their fates are not written in ink but in bone. To find them, we must travel to the heart of Anglo-Saxon England, to the year 873. The great heathen army, an invading force 1,000 strong, has torn the country apart for nearly a decade. They have conquered Northumbria and East Anglia. Now they are in Mercia, one of England's most powerful kingdoms. They drive the Mercian king, Burgred, into exile and seize his realm. They make their winter camp at Repton, a site of profound religious and political importance. This was no mere village. It was home to the royal monastery of the Mercian dynasty, the burial place of its most powerful kings. For the Vikings to occupy Repton was a calculated act of desecration. They were not just taking land, they were erasing a kingdom's sacred history. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records their presence, but it falls silent on the fate of the Mercian people, particularly the noble women of the defeated court. For centuries, their story was a blank, but the earth remembers what the chronicles forget. In the 1980s, archaeologists excavating at St. Wiston's Church in Repton unearthed a mass grave. Beside the church, within a repurposed Anglo-Saxon building, lay the disarticulated and jumbled remains of at least 264 people. For decades, it was assumed they were the Viking invaders themselves, buried together after a battle or a harsh winter of disease. The initial theory about the Repton mass grave, that it held the remains of the great heathen army, seemed plausible. Roughly 80% of the individuals were men of fighting age, many showing signs of violent death. But the remaining 20% were women. For years, they were dismissed as camp followers or the Scandinavian wives of the warriors. But this comfortable assumption was shattered by modern forensic science. A groundbreaking 2018 study, led by bioarchaeologist Kat Jarman and published in the journal Antiquity, use strontium isotope analysis on the teeth from the skeletons. Strontium isotopes in tooth enamel are a permanent record of the geology of the region where a person lived during their childhood. The results were shocking. While many of the men indeed had isotope signatures consistent with an origin in Scandinavia, several of the women did not. Their strontium levels indicated they were local to Mercia or other parts of the British Isles the Vikings had conquered. They died with the Viking army, but they were not Vikings. This discovery rewrites the story of the grave from a warrior burial into something far more macabre. These were the women of the fallen kingdom. Noble women, ladies of the court, the wives and daughters of the Mercian elite. They were not wives, but captives. They were absorbed into the conquering army as slaves and concubines, and when they died, from disease or violence or something worse, they were thrown into the charnel house with their captors, their bones mixed together, their identities lost. This is the forensic evidence of a fate worse than a clean death, to be consumed by the very force that destroyed your world, and to have your final resting place be an anonymous pile of bones in the desecrated heart of your own lost kingdom. Death is not the only way to be erased. Sometimes, the most complete form of destruction is to be written out of history, to have your very existence deleted from the record. For this, we go to England in the year 1016. The Danish king, Cnut the Great, has waged a brutal war of invasion against the English king, Edmund Ironside. After a final, bloody stalemate, they agree to divide the kingdom. But just weeks later, Edmund dies under mysterious circumstances, and Cnut becomes king of all England. His victory is military, but his rule is precarious. He faces a critical political problem. Edmund Ironside had a wife, Queen Ealdgyth, and two infant sons, Edward and Edmund. These boys are the direct heirs of the ancient Wessex dynasty. They are living symbols of resistance, a threat to his newly forged empire. Cnut's solution is a masterpiece of cold political calculation. First, he secures his flank by marrying Emma of Normandy, the widow of the previous English king, Ethelred the Unready. This brilliant move neutralizes the powerful Normans and gives his reign a veneer of legitimacy. He becomes the establishment. In this new political reality, Edmund's queen, Ealdgyth, and her children are a loose thread that could unravel everything. So, Cnut simply snips it. Queen Ealdgyth vanishes. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, our primary source for the period, says nothing of her fate. No saga mentions her. She is simply gone. Was she quietly murdered and buried in an unmarked grave? Was she forced into a nunnery, a common fate for inconvenient royal women? We do not know. Her erasure was a political tool as sharp and effective as any axe. While Queen Ealdgyth was deleted from history, the fate of her sons is chillingly documented. Cnut could not risk killing the infant princes in England. It would make them martyrs and ignite rebellion. So he outsourced the deed. The Chronicle states he sent the boys to his half-brother, the King of Sweden, with implicit instructions for them to be discreetly murdered. The Swedish king, however, refused to be an assassin. He secretly spirited the boys away to the court of Kievan Rus, and from there they eventually found refuge in Hungary. They grew up in exile, ghosts of a lost kingdom, a constant low-level threat to Cnut's empire. One of them, Edward the Exile, would eventually be invited back to England decades later, only to die within days of his arrival, again under highly suspicious circumstances. Consider this fate from Ealdgyth's perspective. Your husband is dead, your kingdom lost. Your children are torn from your arms and shipped across the sea to be killed. And you simply cease to exist. You are so completely removed from the political landscape that not a single contemporary chronicler sees fit to record what became of you. Cnut's conquest was not merely one of armies and territory. It was a war on memory, and Queen Ealdgyth was its most complete casualty. If these forensic deep dives into the darkest corners of history are what you seek, support our work by subscribing to The Sealed Room. There is one more layer to this story, a final whisper in the historical record that is perhaps the most unsettling of all. Decades after Cnut's conquest and the disappearance of Queen Ealdgyth, a different invading army arrived in England. the Normans, themselves descendants of Viking settlers. In 1086, 20 years after their own conquest, they compiled an extraordinary document, the Domesday Book. It was a comprehensive survey of all the land in England, designed to record who owned what for the purposes of taxation. It was an administrative document, a tool of government. But buried within its thousands of entries of manors, mills, and meadows, it contains a ghost. The book recorded not only who held the land in 1086, but also who had held it before the Norman invasion of 1066. Among the thousands of names of Anglo-Saxon landholders, a handful of powerful women are listed who held lands in their own right. In Lincolnshire, the records mention one such woman, an Anglo-Saxon noble named Egifu the Fair. Based on land patterns, associations, and the rarity of the name in that context, some historians have forwarded a tantalizing, unprovable theory that this Egifu the Fair was another name for Ealdgyth, the lost queen of Edmund Ironside, that she had somehow survived the political purge, stripped of her royal status, her identity hidden, living out her days in quiet obscurity as a minor landowner. It is a whisper in the record, a final, chilling possibility. A life not extinguished but erased. A queen watching a foreign dynasty rule her country, her children in exile across the sea, hidden in a cage of silence. We will likely never know for sure. It remains a hypothesis, an echo of a life deliberately forgotten. The stories of these women, Asa Melkorka, the nameless dead of Repton, and the ghost of Ealdgyth, reveal a brutal truth about the nature of Viking Age power. A kingdom was not truly conquered when its king was killed or its army defeated. It was only conquered when its future was controlled, and that future lay in the womb of its queen. She was the vessel of legitimacy, the carrier of the bloodline. To control her was to control the narrative of succession. To enslave her was to debase the old dynasty. To erase her was to create a vacuum that the new order could fill. The fates that befell these women were not random acts of violence. They were strategic decisions made in the cold currency of power and dynastic survival. From forced marriage to political assassination, from the slave markets of Dublin to the unmarked graves of Mercia, the goal was the same: to sever the line of the defeated, to absorb their strength, and to ensure that no legitimate heir could ever rise to challenge the new order. The axe and the longship were the tools of conquest, but the true consolidation of power happened in the aftermath, in the quiet, often unrecorded fates of the women who were left behind in the burning halls, carrying the last embers of a fallen kingdom. Their bodies were the final battlefield.